It wasn't water. It was red. It was sticky. It was falling from a clear blue sky. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. It's a documented event. We trust the sky. It is our constant, our celestial ceiling, the one thing we assume will behave as it always has. But what happens when it breaks the rules? What happens when the sky, with no warning, rains down not water, but fish, or meat, or a gelatinous goo that makes you sick? This is the story of anomalous precipitation. The days the sky fell, and the world was forced to ask, what exactly is above our heads? We are creatures of order. We rely on the fundamental laws of nature to make sense of our world. The sun rises in the east, gravity holds us to the ground, and rain is water. This is the hydrologic cycle, a perfect, closed system we learn in childhood. Evaporation, condensation, precipitation, water, and only water. But our history, from ancient texts to modern news reports, is filled with terrifying violations of this rule. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder, in his 77 AD Encyclopaedia Naturalis Historia, calmly documented rains of flesh, rains of blood, and rains of wool. The Bible tells of plagues raining from the heavens. For our ancestors, these were not scientific puzzles. They were omens. They were the wrath of angry gods, a sign that the very fabric of reality was tearing. But as we moved into the age of science and reason, we didn't stop seeing these things. We just stopped blaming gods and started, desperately, searching for an explanation. We began to document the impossible, and the more we documented, the stranger our world became. Our timeline of these events shows a mystery that doesn't fade with time, it only deepens. The Kentucky Meat Shower, 1876. Our first modern case comes from Bath County, Kentucky, on March 3, 1876. The day was clear. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Mrs. Allen Crouch, a farmer's wife, was outside making soap on her porch. And then it began. For several minutes, flakes of a reddish, fleshy substance rained down on her farm. They were not small. Witnesses described pieces 2 to 3 inches square, one as large as 4 inches. The shower covered an area about 100 yards long and 50 yards wide, spattering her house, her fences, and the ground. Mrs. Crouch and her husband were, understandably, terrified. They believed it was a sign from God. But this was 1876, and the scientific world was curious. The news spread. Samples were collected. A local man, Harrison Gill, tasted it. He declared it tasted like mutton or venison. Other brave locals who sampled the sky meat claimed it was bear. The story was picked up by the Louisville Commercial newspaper and soon by Scientific American and the New York Times. This was no longer just local folklore. It was a national scientific mystery. Several samples were sent to scientists for analysis. A Mr. Leopold Brandeis, in a letter to the Sanitarian Journal, declared the sample he received was undoubtedly nostoc. Nostoc is a type of cyanobacteria that, when it rains, swells up into a strange gelatinous jelly. It's often called star jelly, and it's a common explanation for weird blobs found on the ground after a rain. But this couldn't be right. Mrs. Crouch saw it fall. It was red, and it was, well, meaty. A more thorough analysis came from Dr. J. Lawrence Smith, a respected chemist in Louisville. His conclusion was far more definitive. He wrote, quote, "The substance has been examined microscopically and is found to be animal tissue. The only structures I have been able to identify are lung tissue, cartilage, and muscular fibers. It was meat, real dissected animal meat." So, how did it get into the sky on a clear day? The most popular and enduring theory was proposed by another scientist, Dr. L.D. Kastenbein. He argued that the meat was, in fact, the vomitus of a large flock of vultures. Vultures, when threatened or overfull, will often disgorge their last meal to lighten their load and escape. The theory goes that a flock of well-gorged buzzards, as he put it, flew over the Crouch farm and simultaneously threw up. This explanation has become the official answer, but it is riddled with problems. First, Mrs. Crouch and her neighbors reported a clear sky. A flock of vultures large enough to cover a 100-yard-long patch of ground would have been noticeable. Second, the flakes were described as fresh, not as partially digested, acid-scorched carrion. And third, the sheer volume. It was an entire shower of meat. The Kentucky meat shower remains a grotesque and deeply unsettling punctuation mark in our history. The official explanation feels just as strange as the event itself. The sky, for a few moments, became an abattoir, and no one knows why. Case 2. The Marksville Fish Rain, 1947. We move forward to Marksville, Louisiana, October 23, 1947. This isn't a case of he said, she said. This event was documented by a professional. A.D. Bajkov was a fish biologist working for the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fish. He was in Marksville when he was called by the director of the local bank, who told him something astonishing. Fish were falling from the sky. Bajkov was, of course, skeptical, but when he arrived, the evidence was undeniable. The streets, the roofs, the yards, all were covered in fish. In his report for Science magazine, Bajkov wrote, "I was in the restaurant with my wife when the rain began. The first came in drops, then fish. They were falling on the street, in the yards, on the roofs. But these weren't just any fish. They were specific. They were freshwater fish, native to local waters, several species of sunfish, largemouth bass, and a type of minnow called a shiner. They were all, Bajkov noted, of an average size, about 2 to 4 inches long, and they were fresh. Some were in a perfect condition, as if they had just been pulled from the water." This was not a few fish. This was a rain. The bank director reported fish falling by the thousands. One man was hit on the head. Another found his yard so full of them that he and his wife collected a bucketful. Bajkov, the biologist, was stunned. He knew what a waterspout was, but the conditions were strange. It was a foggy, drizzly day, but there was no high wind, no storm, no tornado. The rain was in a calm, and the fish fell in a normal slanting line, as any rain. It was as if someone had flown an invisible plane over the town and simply dumped a massive, curated aquarium. The rain of fish over Marksville remains one of the most credible, scientifically observed animal falls in history. It happened, but the mechanism? That remains the mystery. Case 3. The Oakville Blobs, 1994. We now come to one of the most terrifying and bizarre events in modern history. The town is Oakville, Washington. The date is August 7th, 1994. It didn't start with a storm. It started with a light rain. Police officer David Lacey was on patrol, driving through the rural area. He turned on his wipers. But the rain didn't wash away. It smeared. He pulled over. His windshield was covered in a strange, translucent, gelatinous goo. It looked like tiny, clear globules of jelly. It was a substance he had never. The mystery deepened when the samples were analyzed. A local resident, Sonny Simpson, managed to collect a sample and mailed it to a private lab. The lab technician, Tim Evans, put it under a microscope. What he saw shocked him. The gelatinous blobs were teeming with living cells. He identified them as human white blood cells. This was impossible. White blood cells are part of the immune system. They should not be in jello, falling from the sky. Officer Lacey's sample was sent to the Washington State Department of Health. Their microbiologist, Mike McDowell, also looked at it. His analysis was even stranger. He agreed. The blobs contained cells, but he had no idea what they were. They were eukaryotic cells, meaning they were complex cells, like in animals. But they had no nucleus. A human white blood cell has a nucleus. So, what were they? The theories exploded. Was it a biological warfare experiment from a nearby military base gone wrong? The military denied it. Was it star jelly, the nostoc bacteria from the Kentucky case? That wouldn't explain the cells. Was it, as some frantic witnesses suggested, human waste from an airplane? The FAA requires that waste to be dyed blue. This was clear. And it wouldn't explain the uniform jello-like consistency or the specific, bizarre sickness that followed. The most popular and most horrifying theory was that the blobs were pieces of a jellyfish, that a military plane flying over the ocean had accidentally hit a large school of jellyfish, chumming them, and the pulverized, aerosolized bits were then carried by the jet stream for 50 miles to be deposited on Oakville. This almost makes sense. It explains the jelly, it explains the sickness, some jellyfish proteins are toxic, it explains the cells. But it doesn't explain the lack of a nucleus in the cells. And it doesn't explain the 6 distinct rains over 3 weeks. To this day, the Oakville Blobs are completely, terrifyingly unexplained. It was a biological event that violated all known rules, and it left a town. Case 4. The Red Rain of Kerala, 2001. Sometimes the most terrifying whispers have a rational, if no less strange, explanation. In July 2001, in the state of Kerala, southern India, it began to rain blood. Residents reported a loud boom, like a sonic boom, followed by a flash of light, and then the downpour. But it wasn't water. It was a thick, red, arterial rain that stained clothes pink, that collected in gutters like something from a slaughterhouse. The panic was immediate. This was the end of the world. This was divine wrath. The government was called. Scientists were mobilized. Samples were collected, and the theories began. The first theory was a meteor. The initial boom suggested a meteor had exploded in the upper atmosphere. Was the red color the remnants of this extraterrestrial object? One physicist, Dr. Godfrey Lewis, even proposed a wild theory, that the rain contained alien microbes, cells from a comet that had seeded life on Earth. He claimed the cells he analyzed had no DNA and were reproducing at high temperatures. This was a world-changing claim. The second theory was simpler: terrestrial dust. Was it dust from a volcano? Or dust from the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, swept up into the atmosphere, which then seeded the rain clouds, coloring them red? It took years of analysis, but the final answer was found by the Tropical Botanic Garden and Research Institute. The red rain of Kerala was not blood. It was not alien. It was life. The water was thick with the spores of a locally known but prolific algae, a specific species called Trentipolia. This algae grows abundantly on trees and rocks in the area, and its spores are a deep blood red. The scientific consensus now is that a massive local updraft, a downburst of weather, must have stripped a vast area of these spores from the trees, lifting them high into the atmosphere. There, they mixed with rain clouds, becoming so concentrated that when the rain finally fell, it fell red. The boom was likely just the thunderclap that triggered the downburst. The alien cells were just tough terrestrial spores. The Kerala rain is a perfect example of how a natural, if rare, phenomenon can create an event that seems supernatural. It was a mystery, but a mystery solved. It reminds us that our world is strange enough even without breaking the laws of physics. But it does not explain Oakville, it does not explain Kentucky, and it doesn't fully explain the fish. So what is happening? When we dismiss the supernatural, we are left with a handful of powerful but incomplete scientific theories. Theory 1, the waterspout. This is the official explanation for every animal rain, and it is a good one. A tornadic waterspout, a tornado that forms over water, is a powerful atmospheric vacuum cleaner. Its vortex can reach speeds of over 100 miles per hour. As it moves over a shallow lake or a bay, it can suck up not just water, but everything in the water: frogs, fish, crabs, snails. The tornado then travels over land. As its energy dissipates, its grip loosens, and it rains its contents, often miles from their original source. This explains the Marksville fish rain. It explains the reports of fish raining on a desert town in Lejeune, Australia, which has happened 4 times, most recently in 2023. A waterspout likely formed over a nearby lake or river, and the wind did the rest. But this theory has problems. Why does it almost always rain one species? In Marksville, it was only a few types of freshwater fish. In Lejeune, it was only spangled perch. Why not all the other life in that water? Why no mud, no seaweed, no gravel? Why are the fish not shredded by the vortex or frozen solid at high altitude? The waterspout theory is the best we have, but it feels too simple. It doesn't explain the neat, curated nature of the falls. Theory 2. The ballooning spiders. One of the most terrifying reports is of spider rain, as seen in Goulburn, Australia in 2015, when the town was covered in a ghostly blanket of webs and tiny spiders. This, thankfully, is 100% solved phenomenon. It's called ballooning or kiting. Young spiderlings, in order to disperse, will climb to a high point, release a long, fine strand of silk, and let the wind and the Earth's static electric field lift them into the air. When millions do this at once, it's a mass migration. When the weather changes, they all come down at once. It is not a rain, it is a landing, a creepy but perfectly natural event. Theory 3. The Unexplained. And then we are left with the anomalies, the true whispers from the deep sky, the Kentucky meat shower. The vulture theory is plausible, but shaky. The clear sky, the freshness of the meat, it remains a deeply strange event. And the Oakville Blobs. This is the case that defies all theories. Biological warfare? Too conspiratorial. Jellyfish chum? The logistics are staggering. Human waste? It doesn't fit the evidence. The blobs remain a true 20th century Fortean event, a moment when something profoundly alien, whether from this world or not, fell on a small town and left sickness in its wake. We may never know what it was. It's a mystery that has simply dissolved. We live our lives on a stage, under a vast blue spotlight. We trust that spotlight. We trust the sky. It is the very symbol of predictability. But these events, the meat, the fish, the blood, the goo, they are cracks in that ceiling. They are reminders that our neat, orderly hydrologic cycle is part of a much larger, chaotic, and infinitely stranger system. They are reminders that we are small, and the atmosphere above us is a vast, unexplored ocean of its own, full of currents, life, and forces we have only just begun to understand. The rain of spores and Kerala shows us how a simple, natural event can look like the apocalypse. The rain of fish and Marksville shows us the raw, selective power of the wind. And the blobs of Oakville, they show us that sometimes there is no answer. Sometimes the sky does break the rules. Sometimes it rains things that should not exist. And we are left as our ancestors were, looking up with a newfound sense of wonder and a very, very old sense of fear.